The night was unusually cold, a deep, biting chill that seemed to crawl beneath my skin, wrapping itself around my bones. It was the kind of cold that sinks into you and doesn't let go, lingering long after you've closed the windows and turned up the heat. The house felt different, too large and strangely hollow, like the walls themselves were growing taller with each passing minute. It was as if the space around me was expanding, leaving me smaller and more insignificant, a single person in an ancient house that had witnessed too many things it would never tell. Outside, the wind had picked up, howling through the trees in the yard like a pack of wolves. The branches of the old tree out back slammed against the window, clawing at the glass with a rhythmic scratching sound that echoed throughout the house. It wasn't the usual rustling of wind through branches, it was something more deliberate, something far more sinister. The tree seemed to groan and moan with the wind, its limbs scraping against the house as if trying to warn me of something, or perhaps trying to get in. The noise was relentless, and it seemed to match the unease that was spreading through me. As I lay in bed, the blankets pulled tight around me, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The quiet was almost deafening, the kind of silence that fills a room with a heavy, suffocating weight. My eyes were wide open, staring at the dark ceiling above me, and yet, despite being alone in my room, I couldn't shake the sensation that I wasn't the only one there. It was like the house itself was holding its breath, as if it was waiting for something to happen. My mind raced with thoughts I couldn't control, and I kept listening to the wind outside, trying to convince myself it was just a storm, nothing more. I reached for my phone with trembling hands and glanced at the clock, my pulse quickening as I saw the time, 2:43 a.m. It felt significant somehow, as though the time itself was a marker, a moment that would define the night. It was as if the universe had decided that this moment, in this house, was meant to be a turning point. A shift would come, and I had no way of knowing what it would bring. I hadn't heard my mom come in yet, which was strange. Usually, when she stumbled in after a night of drinking, she made a lot of noise slamming doors, mumbling to herself, the clinking of bottles in the kitchen. But tonight, there was nothing. The house was still, as though it had been abandoned. My mom had promised she would be home by 10 or 11 at the latest, but I knew better than to expect her to keep those promises. It was just another broken word in a long line of them. I had gotten used to it, used to being the one to pick up the pieces. I stared at the window, the wind pushing the tree branches against the glass with a strange persistence, as if they were trying to communicate something to me. The clock ticked rhythmically, its sound sharp in the otherwise silent room. My stomach churned, and I felt a familiar sense of dread creeping up my spine. It wasn't just the quiet that unnerved me, it was the feeling that I wasn't truly alone. Even though I had spent countless nights in this house by myself, tonight felt different. It felt like the house was watching me, waiting for something. I lay there for what felt like hours, my mind racing with thoughts I couldn't control. I kept glancing at the clock, half expecting it to stop entirely, as though time itself was caught in some sort of limbo. But no, the minutes continued to tick by, slow and deliberate. My pulse was racing now, the darkness pressing in around me, and all I could hear was the wind and the sound of my own breathing. The feeling of being watched never went away. It wasn't a sensation I could pinpoint, but it was there, lingering just at the edge of my awareness. I tried to shake it off, tried to tell myself it was just the wind, just the storm outside, but deep down I knew better. There was something in the house with me. Something that had been waiting for the right moment to make itself known. The silence felt thicker now, like it was closing in on me, suffocating me with its weight. It was as if the house itself had become a living thing, aware of my every move, my every breath. And then I heard it, the faintest sound. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but then it came again, this time closer, more distinct. It was a scratching sound, like fingernails on wood, or a gentle tap 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 against the glass. I froze, holding my breath. My eyes darted around the room, searching for the source of the sound. Was it the tree outside again? Or was something else trying to get in? I forced myself to sit up, my heart pounding in my chest, my hands shaking uncontrollably. The noise persisted, soft at first, but then louder, more insistent. It was coming from the direction of the basement. The basement. I had always known that place felt wrong, but I had never been able to fully explain why. The door to the basement was always a little off-kilter, a little too warped to close properly. It creaked in the wind, and the floorboards above it groaned at the slightest movement. But this sound, it was different. The rhythm was deliberate, slow, like someone was trying to make their way inside. I could hear it clearer now: scrape, tap, scrape. It was coming from the basement door. My blood ran cold. I tried to tell myself that it was nothing, that it was just my mom trying to get in, that she had forgotten her keys or was too drunk to remember the way to the door. But deep down, I knew it wasn't her. It couldn't be. The feeling of dread that had settled in my chest told me this was something far worse. Something more dangerous. I forced myself to move, my legs weak beneath me as I crept toward the door. The floorboards creaked under my weight, and I winced with every step, hoping the noise wouldn't give me away. The basement door was slightly cracked open, just enough to let the wind in. I could see the shadows moving behind the frosted glass, but I couldn't make out who or what was there. I stood at the top of the stairs, staring down into the darkness, my breath shallow, my mind screaming at me to turn around, to get out of there. But I couldn't. I had to know. What was going on? What was that sound? And then, just as I was about to step forward, I heard its soft laughter, low and menacing, coming from the other side of the door. My heart stopped. The door clicked open. In that moment, I knew something had gone horribly wrong. I tried to push the thoughts away, but they kept coming back, swirling in my mind like a storm. The more I tried to ignore them, the louder they grew, until I couldn't pretend they weren't there anymore. My heart began to race, and my breath quickened in response to the increasing tension. I sat up in bed, the coldness of the room sinking deeper into my skin. The house was eerily quiet, but that only made the growing sense of unease more unbearable. I felt something stirring in the air, something not right. It was as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. That's when I heard it. A soft scraping sound. My first instinct was to chalk it up to the wind, the house settling as it often did when it got colder, but as I listened, I realized it was something more. It wasn't a gust of wind or the usual creaks and groans of old wood. It was steady, persistent, and deliberate. My breath hitched as I strained to hear. The sound was faint at first, so faint that I wondered if I was imagining it, like fingernails scraping against wood in the distance. But then it came again, louder this time, more distinct, and it seemed to be getting closer. My heart raced faster, and I found myself holding my breath, unsure of what to do next. Was it the wind, or was it something more sinister? I tried to convince myself it was just the house shifting, the usual sounds of an old building settling into the night. But the more I listened, the more I realized this wasn't normal. It wasn't random. It was too rhythmic, too deliberate, as if someone or something was purposely making that noise. A feeling of dread crawled up my spine, and a cold sweat broke out on my forehead. The sound grew louder now, unmistakable, coming from downstairs, from the direction of the basement. My pulse quickened as I lay frozen in bed, listening. Thud. Scrape. Thud. Scrape. Each sound sent a jolt of fear through me. Someone was at the basement door. I knew the door was old, and I'd heard it creak many times before when the house shifted. But this was different. This was purposeful. Someone was trying to get in. My stomach twisted with anxiety. My mind raced, trying to come up with an explanation. Could it be my mom? Maybe she had forgotten her keys, as she often did when she was out drinking. Maybe she was so drunk that she couldn't remember how to open the door. But no, something in my gut told me this wasn't her. This wasn't the usual stumbling or muttering I'd grown accustomed to when she came home after a night out. This was something entirely different. This wasn't just a drunken mistake. This was someone trying to break into the house. I pushed myself up slowly, my limbs heavy with fear, but I couldn't stay in bed. I had to know what was going on. I tried to be as quiet as possible, making sure not to make a sound. My bare feet barely made a sound on the old wooden floor, each step feeling like it was taking me closer to something I couldn't understand. My mind kept racing with 1,000 possible explanations, each one more terrifying than the last, but I had to know. I had to face whatever was waiting downstairs. The noise was unmistakable now, a rhythmic thud, followed by a scrape. It was like someone was trying to force the basement door open, but they weren't being quiet about it. I felt a chill run down my spine, and I shivered, despite the warmth of my blankets still clinging to my skin. My hand trembled as I reached for the doorknob, but I couldn't bring myself to turn it just yet. I had to be sure. I couldn't face whatever was on the other side without knowing what it was. I crept through the dark hallway, moving as silently as I could. Every small creak of the floorboards beneath my feet seemed amplified in the heavy silence. My heart was pounding in my chest now, so loud I feared it would give me away. I reached the top of the stairs, my breath shallow and quick. The basement door was cracked open just a little, and the sound was now unmistakable, a constant rhythm of scraping and thudding. My feet felt like they were glued to the floor, but I forced myself to move, my body trembling with fear and anticipation. I looked down the stairs. The basement door, partially open, was bathed in shadow, and through the frosted glass, I could just make out a dark silhouette. It didn't look like my mom. The shape was taller, broader, more menacing. My stomach dropped, and the blood drained from my face. It was then that I saw it move, just a slight shift, but enough to confirm that someone or something was there. Panic surged through me like an electric shock, and my knees almost gave way beneath me. I held my breath, straining to listen. The scraping noise stopped for a moment, and I thought I could hear breathing, slow and steady, coming from the other side of the door. My chest tightened as I fought to keep my composure, but everything inside me was screaming to run, to hide, to get away from whatever was lurking in the basement. The silhouette shifted again, and I could see more clearly now that it wasn't my mom. It was a man. He was standing there, still, watching, waiting. My heart pounded in my chest, and I fought to stay as quiet as possible. Every fiber of my being screamed for me to run, to get out of the house before it was too late. But I was frozen in place, paralyzed by fear. Then I heard the click of the basement door. It was barely audible, but in that moment, it sounded like a bomb going off in my ears. The door swung open. I was standing at the top of the stairs, my heart in my throat, unable to move. The man didn't see me yet, but I could feel his eyes on me. He didn't know I was there, but I knew then that my worst fear had come true. I wasn't alone. I stood frozen at the top of the stairs, my legs trembling so badly that I almost collapsed. My whole body felt like it was being pulled into the darkness below, each second stretching out longer than the last. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears, a harsh, frantic rhythm that seemed to echo throughout the entire house. The dark figure in the basement hadn't moved yet, but I could feel its presence like an oppressive weight pressing down on me. It was watching me, or perhaps it was waiting for me to make a move. I couldn't tell what was happening, but I knew one thing for sure: I couldn't stay there much longer. My mind was racing, jumping from one terrifying possibility to another. My breaths were coming out in short, shallow bursts, the anxiety suffocating me. I knew I couldn't just walk downstairs and confront whoever or whatever was lurking in the basement. But I couldn't stay up here either. Every moment I lingered, I felt more vulnerable, more exposed. I had to do something, but what? I glanced over my shoulder, almost expecting to see something creeping behind me, but the hallway remained eerily still. The house was silent, except for the wind howling outside, like some kind of warning. I swallowed hard, my throat dry, and then, with a shaky breath, I took a tentative step forward, closer to the stairs. My feet were cold, and I could feel the weight of the floor beneath me, the old wooden boards creaking in protest as I moved. With each step, the darkness seemed to press in closer. I could barely see anything but the shadowy outline of the basement door, its cracked edges letting a sliver of light spill through. I reached the top of the stairs, my foot hovering just over the first step, and I hesitated. The wind howled outside, and the house groaned again just like before, but now, it felt different. It wasn't just the house settling. It was as if the house itself was alive, waiting, holding its breath. I forced myself to step down, my foot dragging as slowly as I could manage. The wooden boards beneath me creaked so loudly that it felt like they might shatter under my weight. My heart skipped a beat, and I froze, the blood draining from my face. I was sure the figure downstairs had heard me, but when I looked down, there was no movement. The silence in the house was so heavy now it felt suffocating, like a thick, tangible fog. I slowly took another step, closer to the edge of the stairs, trying to move quietly, trying not to make a single sound. But every step felt like a thunderclap in the stillness of the house. My hand was shaking so badly as I reached out for the basement door that I almost couldn't grasp the handle. It was cold to the touch, and for a second, I just stood there, paralyzed by the fear of what I might find on the other side. The door was so old, the wood warped and cracked, but it wasn't the door that was terrifying, it was the man behind it. I could feel him, even if I couldn't see him. Time seemed to slow, each second stretching into an eternity as I stood there, just outside the basement door. The silence was unbearable now. My breath was shallow, every inhale like a desperate attempt to hold it all together. My body was trembling uncontrollably. I needed to open the door. I had to know what was on the other side, but my mind was screaming at me to turn back, to run, to get out of the house and never look back. But there was no running. No way out. I took a deep breath, my lungs burning, and I pushed the door open just a little. The creak of the hinges sent a jolt of panic through my chest, and my hand shook so violently I almost dropped the handle. That's when I heard it. A voice. Low, dark, and utterly menacing. Jackpot. The word echoed through the silence of the basement, sending a chill racing down my spine. My breath caught in my throat, and my legs almost gave out beneath me. I froze, unable to move, unable to think. I had been expecting something, but this was worse than anything I could have imagined. This wasn't a random stranger or some misplaced, drunken attempt to break in. This was someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Someone who had been waiting for this moment, for me. It felt like the air had been sucked from the room, leaving only the raw, biting fear in its wake. In that moment, I realized how utterly helpless I was. I was alone, a 14-year-old girl, standing on the edge of the basement stairs, facing down a threat I couldn't even begin to comprehend. The darkness down there wasn't just the absence of light, it was the absence of safety, of security, of anything familiar. And this man, this figure, was waiting for me, just out of sight, ready to make his move. Panic surged through me, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure he could hear it. Every fiber of my being screamed for me to run, to get away, to hide somewhere far from this nightmare. But I couldn't. I was trapped. There was nowhere to go. I took a step back, my legs barely holding me up as I backed away from the door. I didn't want to turn my back to the basement. I was terrified that if I did, something would reach out and grab me, pulling me down into the darkness. My legs were shaking so badly now that it was a miracle I didn't collapse on the stairs. I had no idea what to do. No plan, no escape. I could feel the figure watching me waiting. I was vulnerable, terrified, and completely alone in the darkness of the house. I knew I couldn't stay there much longer. But I also knew I couldn't face whatever was waiting in the basement. I was frozen in place, caught between the terror of moving forward and the paralyzing fear of turning back. Then I heard it again, another voice, this time louder, more insistent. It was a man, but there was something off about his tone. It was almost like a challenge, a dare. "You can run," he said. "But it won't matter." The words sent a wave of ice-cold dread through my body. He wasn't just watching me. He knew I was trapped. He knew there was nowhere for me to hide. I backed away from the stairs even further, my heart racing as my mind struggled to make sense of everything. The basement door was still partially open, but the figure, he was still down there, just out of view. The tension in the air was so thick I could barely breathe. My instincts screamed at me to move, to act, to do something. But all I could do was stand there, paralyzed by fear, and pray that somehow I would make it out of this nightmare alive. My body felt as though it had turned to stone. Every muscle in my body locked in place, frozen in fear. The tension in the air was thick, and every instinct I had was screaming at me to run, to flee to safety. But no matter how much my mind told me to move, my body wouldn't cooperate. I stood there, paralyzed, my heart pounding in my chest as I watched the figure in the basement take a slow, deliberate step forward. His presence was overwhelming, like a dark cloud slowly closing in around me. He didn't see me yet, but I knew it was only a matter of time before he did. My mind raced with 1,000 possibilities, each more terrifying than the last. What was I supposed to do? Should I try to confront him? Could I make it to the front door? My legs were heavy, stiff, as though they no longer belonged to me. I couldn't get them to move, no matter how hard I tried. I could feel the weight of my own fear pressing down on me like a physical force. I tried to focus, tried to think clearly, but the pounding of my heart was deafening, drowning out everything else. It thudded in my ears like a drum beat, too loud, too insistent. My breathing came in shallow gasps, each breath an effort, as if the air around me had turned thick and suffocating. I had to move. I had to do something, but the paralyzing terror in my chest was all-consuming, and I could hardly make sense of my own thoughts. Then, in a sickening twist of fate, I heard the unmistakable sound of a door creaking open slowly, deliberately. It was a sound that sent a chill running down my spine, and I realized, in that gut-wrenching moment, that I was no longer alone. Someone had entered the house. The unmistakable sound of footsteps echoed in the hallway below, and my blood ran cold. They were coming for me. Time stopped, and I felt my mind scramble to process the situation. I had no time left. The basement door was about to open, and I was trapped, paralyzed in the darkness. There was no escape, no hiding anymore. The figure in the basement, who had been lurking in the shadows, was stepping closer, and now, someone else was in the house, potentially closing in from another direction. I couldn't breathe. I had to get out of there. Suddenly, my legs regained feeling. I could feel the heat in my body surge as the adrenaline kicked in. My mind raced fight or flight. There was no time to think about anything else. I pushed the overwhelming fear aside and bolted for the stairs. My legs felt like they were on fire as I raced up the creaky wooden steps, each one feeling like an eternity. I couldn't look back, I couldn't waste precious seconds. Every footstep, Every creak of the stairs beneath me felt like it could be my last. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed behind me. The figure was following, not far behind. I could hear the thudding of his boots against the floor, the faint rustle of his movement. The silence in the house had been shattered by the sounds of pursuit. My breath was ragged now, and I felt the burn in my muscles as I pushed myself harder, faster, desperate to reach the top. The world around me felt like it was closing in the dark, oppressive air of the house seemed to swallow me whole, and I had no idea how much time I had left before everything went horribly wrong. I reached the top of the stairs and glanced back over my shoulder. I didn't know what I was hoping to see. Maybe I was just looking for a moment of hope, a glimpse of safety. But what I saw instead made my heart plummet to the pit of my stomach. The basement door was wide open now, and the dark figure was stepping into the faint light. His features were still obscured by the shadows, but the sheer presence of him was enough to make my skin crawl. I could feel the coldness of his stare even from this distance. I knew then that I had only seconds left before he realized I was there. The seconds seemed to stretch into eternity as I stood frozen at the top of the stairs. My body was telling me to run, to get as far away from the danger as possible, but part of me was still clinging to the hope that somehow, someone would save me. There was no time for hope now. Without thinking, I sprinted for the front door. I didn't hesitate. I didn't stop to consider any other options. I had to get out. My legs burned with every step, but the fear that surged through me pushed me forward, faster, harder. The pounding footsteps behind me were getting closer, and I could feel the heat rising in my body as I moved faster and faster. I could hear the man's voice now, his gruff, menacing tone cutting through the air as he shouted to someone below. "Don't let her get away." It was like a slap to the face. He wasn't even trying to be quiet anymore. I was running for my life, and he knew it. The fight or flight response kicked in harder now. My breath was coming in gasps, and I could feel the cold sweat sticking to the back of my neck. The world around me had narrowed to just one goal, the front door. I reached the front door and tried the handle. My hands were slick with sweat, my fingers fumbling as I tried to turn the knob. I had seconds. Just seconds before he caught up to me. I could hear his heavy footsteps behind me, closer, closer. My pulse raced as I pulled the door open, the cold air hitting my face as I stepped outside. But just as I was about to take that first step into freedom, I heard it a loud bang. The door slammed shut behind me. My heart stopped for a split second, and I turned in panic. The dark figure was now standing at the foot of the stairs, just a few feet away. He had caught up to me. I had no choice. I sprinted down the porch steps, my legs aching, my body screaming for rest. But I couldn't stop. I couldn't slow down. I had to get away. I didn't look back. I didn't dare. I reached the street, and I could hear the sound of sirens in the distance. They were coming. I wasn't alone anymore. The figures chasing me had lost the element of surprise. And as the sound of sirens grew louder, the dark figures in the house slowly started to retreat. I wasn't sure if they were leaving or if they were just pausing for a moment. All I knew was that I had survived. For now. The street was deserted, but the weight of the danger still hung over me. I didn't stop running until I reached a neighbor's house. I pounded on the door, my hands shaking violently as I struggled to breathe. The door opened a moment later, and the neighbor took one look at me and immediately called the police. I collapsed on their couch, shaking uncontrollably. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how to explain what had just happened. All I could do was whisper the words, "They're gone. They're gone." But in my heart, I knew that I would never feel truly safe again. I ran blindly, my legs feeling like they were made of stone, barely able to carry me as panic surged through my veins like wildfire. My heart hammered violently against my chest, its beat so loud it seemed to echo in my ears, drowning out everything else. Every breath was a struggle, coming in ragged, shallow gasps, each one more frantic than the last. My body shook uncontrollably, my hands trembling as I gripped the edges of the walls, trying to steady myself. There was no time for thinking, just running, just surviving. The sounds of their footsteps were growing closer, heavier, like thunder echoing through the hallways. The air seemed to thicken around me, pressing against my chest, making it harder to breathe. Their voices, low and mocking, filtered through the walls, their laughter sending chills down my spine. Every moment, I feared that if I slowed, even for a second, they would catch me. They were hunting me, and I could feel it. The thought made my blood run cold. The basement door loomed ahead, a dark, unfamiliar refuge I could only hope would offer safety. It seemed miles away, even though it was just a few steps. I didn't dare look back. The sound of their pursuit behind me pushed me forward, urging me on. If I looked back, if I hesitated, I knew they'd have me. Finally, I reached the door, my fingers trembling as I reached for the handle. It felt like an eternity passed as I yanked on it, but the old wood was stiff, resistant to my desperate pull. I could hear their voices getting louder, closer now. I could almost feel their hands reaching for me, even though I hadn't turned around. Time seemed to stretch as I pulled and twisted the door handle. And then, with a groan, it gave way. I didn't stop. I didn't think. The door swung open with a creak, and I bolted through it into the blackness of the basement, the chill of the air rushing past me. My feet barely touched the ground as I sprinted across the cold, concrete floor, desperate to get away from the danger that was closing in. My body felt like it was about to give out at any moment, my legs trembling with exhaustion, but I pushed forward. I couldn't stop. I couldn't afford to. Their laughter echoed from behind me, taunting me, mocking me as I stumbled through the dark. Every step was a battle. My legs were heavy, my body screaming for rest, but my mind was clear. Escape was all that mattered. The sound of their footsteps reverberated in the house, louder now, growing nearer. They were getting closer, and every second felt like a countdown to disaster. The basement, with its maze of old boxes and furniture, seemed endless. I was lost in its darkness, my senses overwhelmed by the silence and the pounding of my own heart. I didn't know where I was going, but I could feel their presence, feel them closing in. They were coming for me, and I knew they wouldn't stop until they had me. I stumbled into the kitchen, my body on the verge of collapse. My hands shook uncontrollably as I reached for the phone on the counter. It felt so far away, as though I had to reach across an entire universe to grab it. When my fingers finally brushed the cold plastic of the phone, I felt a flicker of hope. I could call for help. I could make it out of this. But just as I was about to dial 911, a sharp sound pierced the air, a thud that froze me in place. They were already in the kitchen. The unmistakable sound of their footsteps entering the room was followed by a low chuckle, the kind that made my blood run cold. They were too close for comfort. My stomach dropped, and I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. The fear was overwhelming. I had no choice. I had to run. I had to get away. I turned on my heel, my legs stiff and uncooperative, and sprinted for the back door. My hand fumbled for the knob, my fingers slick with sweat. The door was stuck, resisting my frantic attempts to open it. I heard them coming closer, their laughter growing louder, their voices full of malicious delight. They knew they had me. They were enjoying the chase. Finally, the door creaked open, and I bolted through it, not caring where I was going, not caring what direction I was headed. I just needed to get out. I needed to put as much distance between myself and them as possible. The cold night air hit me like a slap in the face, but I didn't slow down. My legs were burning, my chest aching with every breath, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. I heard them shouting behind me, their voices fading slightly as I pushed further into the darkness of the backyard. The sound of their pursuit still echoed in my ears, but I focused on running, on getting to safety. My feet slapped against the grass, and the chill of the night air made my skin prickle with cold. Every step felt like a victory, like I was getting closer to escaping the nightmare. But I knew they were still close. I could hear them. I could hear their voices growing fainter, but that didn't mean they had stopped. They were still coming. I didn't care where I was going. I just had to get away. My lungs burned, and my legs felt like they were going to give out, but I kept running. My breath came in ragged gasps, my heart pounding in my chest, but I couldn't stop. I had to survive. I had to escape. And that's when I saw it, the neighbor's house, glowing faintly in the distance. My eyes locked onto the light, the hope that I was finally close to safety. I pushed myself harder, my legs screaming, but I couldn't stop. I ran, faster now, toward the house, knowing that it was my only chance to survive. When I reached the door, I didn't even knock. I just pounded on it with both fists, desperate, trembling, praying someone would answer. The door swung open, and I collapsed into the arms of my neighbor, sobbing uncontrollably. I was safe. Finally. The police arrived shortly after, sirens blaring as they pulled up outside. I explained everything that had happened, everything I had seen. They took the men into custody, but the truth was, I didn't feel relief. I didn't feel like I had truly escaped until I was somewhere I felt safe, surrounded by people who cared. The nightmare was over. But I knew it would never leave me. I didn't stop running until I reached the neighbor's house, my heart still pounding in my chest, each beat like a drum calling for survival. My legs burned with exhaustion, and my breath came in jagged gasps, but none of that mattered. I had to get away from them, away from the nightmare that had been chasing me down every hallway, through every corner of the house. I pounded on the door with all the strength I had left, knocking frantically, my hands trembling so violently that they could barely stay steady on the wood. Each knock seemed to echo in the night, a frantic plea for safety. Then, I heard it, a faint sound of footsteps approaching from inside. My heart leapt, hope flaring inside me like a beacon in the darkness. The door swung open, and I was met with the worried face of my neighbor. "Hey, are you all right?" she asked, her voice filled with genuine concern. But I couldn't answer her. My throat felt tight, like it had closed up entirely. All I could do was nod, my knees buckling beneath me as I collapsed into her arms. The warmth of her embrace, the simple act of being held, was enough to break the dam inside me. I shook uncontrollably, the adrenaline that had kept me running now draining from my body, leaving me weak and trembling. "Shh, you're safe now," my neighbor whispered, rubbing my back soothingly, but the words didn't bring the comfort I was desperate for. Safe? Yes, for now. But everything still felt so raw, so broken. The images of what had happened flashed behind my eyes, each one more terrifying than the last. It felt like an eternity before the police arrived, their sirens blaring down the street, growing louder as they pulled up to the house. Relief flooded through me, but it was quickly replaced by a heavy, suffocating dread. The men who had been chasing me, the ones who had terrorized my home, were being taken into custody. The police were doing their job, and I knew they were going to stop them, but my mind couldn't focus on that. It kept going back to one person, the one person who should have been there for me, the one person who was supposed to protect me. My mom. She still wasn't home. She didn't even know what had happened to me. I didn't even know where she was. The thought of it hit me like a punch to the gut. She had been out at the bar, oblivious to the terror I had been living through. I was just a kid 14 years old fending for myself in a situation no one should have to face, let alone alone. The anger swirled inside me, mixing with the deep, empty feeling of abandonment. The police spoke with me for what felt like hours, their voices muffled and distant, as if I were submerged underwater. Their questions blurred together, their concern for my well-being lost in the chaos of my own thoughts. I couldn't focus on their words. I couldn't focus on anything except the terror that had gripped me, the sheer randomness of it all. How had I ended up in such a horrifying situation? I couldn't make sense of it. Each time I tried to calm my mind, the images of those men closing in on me, their laughter echoing in my ears, would come rushing back. I kept asking myself why my mom hadn't been there. Why had I been left to face this alone? My whole life, I had taken care of her, cleaning up after her, making sure she was okay. I had been her protector. But tonight, I had needed her, and she wasn't there. It wasn't that I hadn't expected it, this was just how things had always been. But still, the sting of it was unbearable. The police officer who had been talking to me paused, sensing the shift in my mood, and handed me a tissue. "We're going to make sure you're safe," he said, his voice gentle. But I didn't feel safe. I didn't feel anything except numb. By the time they took me to a safe house, the night was starting to slip into morning. The new place was cold, sterile like a hospital room or a place where people were meant to wait until they were moved on. I was given a small room, a bed that was too clean to be comforting, and nothing familiar. There were no signs of warmth, no place for me to hide from what I had just gone through. The walls felt too white, too clinical, and the silence was suffocating. There was no one here I knew, no one who could hold me and tell me everything would be okay. That night, I was placed into foster care. The feeling of being shuffled around, like a piece of unwanted baggage, was overwhelming. I was alone, completely alone, and there was nothing in this strange, foreign place that made me feel any better. I was safe, yes. But the feeling of emptiness, of abandonment settled in my chest and stayed there, heavy and suffocating. I had survived the night, but the aftermath was almost as terrifying as the events themselves. My mom's absence was a constant reminder that I had been forced to grow up long before I should have. The police had done their part, and the men who had broken into my house were now in custody. But for me, the scars ran deeper. I knew I could never forget the terror I had faced that night. The men, the basement, the fear that had seized my chest and made it impossible to breathe, those memories would follow me, whether I wanted them to or not. As the days passed, I tried to push the images from my mind, but it was no use. I couldn't escape the sound of their laughter, the sickening feeling of being hunted. I couldn't forget the dark figure in the basement or the feeling of helplessness that had taken hold of me. I had survived, yes. But the nightmares came every night, and the feeling of being watched never quite left me. My mom? She didn't even know what had happened. She was too drunk to care, too absorbed in her own world to notice the terror I had just survived. It was hard to reconcile the fact that the person I had been so desperate to protect had never once been there when I needed her most. That night, I was placed into foster care. I was safe, but I was still just a scared, broken kid. Years have passed, and time has a strange way of dulling the edges of pain, but I can still remember that night as vividly as if it had happened yesterday. Every detail, every fear, every moment of helplessness still lingers in my mind like a dark shadow that refuses to fade. I've built a new life for myself, one that's far removed from the chaos of my childhood. I've learned to protect myself in ways I never thought possible. But no matter how far I've come, the scars of that night still linger, like a silent reminder that some things you can never truly escape. I've done my best to move on. I've worked hard, surrounded myself with people who care about me, and created a life that, on the surface, looks normal. But every now and then, something will trigger those memories. The nightmares are the worst, creeping in when I least expect them. They're always the same, vivid, haunting, and terrifying. I wake up in a cold sweat, my heart racing, the echoes of those men's laughter still ringing in my ears. I can never escape the feeling of their eyes on me, of being hunted, of being trapped. It's like my mind replays that night in a loop, trying to relieve every horrific second. Sometimes, when I pass by a basement door or a dark, enclosed space, my heart skips a beat, and the old fear flares up. I find myself holding my breath, wondering what might have happened if I hadn't escaped when I did. What would have happened if I had stayed? What would they have done to me? The questions linger, unanswered, and I can't help but picture their faces I've never been able to forget. Their expressions, twisted with malice, still haunt the darkest corners of my mind. I try to push it all away, to convince myself that I've moved on, that I'm stronger now, but the truth is that the fear never truly goes away. It's always there, just beneath the surface, a constant companion I can't seem to shake. It's not a fear I let control me anymore, but it's a part of who I am. It's the shadow that follows me wherever I go, a reminder of my past that I can't fully escape. But here's the thing, I've learned to live with it. I've learned how to function in a world that will never be the same. The fear I carry now has made me stronger in ways I never thought possible. I'm more aware of my surroundings, more cautious in situations that feel off. I don't take risks like I used to. I trust fewer people now, but I trust myself more than I ever have. I know how to recognize danger when it's near, how to protect myself when I need to. And though that fear still haunts me, it also fuels me. It makes me vigilant, makes me aware, makes me prepared. The lessons I've learned are hard-earned. I've learned to never take my safety for granted, to always be on guard, to trust my instincts above all else. It's a different way of living, one that's shaped by my past, but not defined by it. I can't undo what happened, and I can't forget it, no matter how hard I try. But I've come to accept that. It's part of who I am now, part of what made me the person I am today. I'll never forget that night, nor will I ever be able to. It's a scar that runs deep, and it will always be there, reminding me of the fragility of life, of how quickly everything can change. But it's also a scar I wear proudly. It's a reminder that I survived. That despite everything, I made it through. That I didn't let the darkness take me down. And no matter what happens in the future, I know I have the strength to face whatever comes my way. I'll never let that darkness define me, and I'll never let it win. It's strange, but in a way, I'm grateful for what happened. Not for the terror, not for the pain, but for the strength it gave me. I've learned how to live with the fear, how to make it part of my armor instead of my burden. And for that, I'll always be thankful. Because I know now that no matter how dark the world may seem, I have the light inside me to keep pushing forward. I'm not the same person I was before that night. I've been shaped by it, and it's made me more resilient, more aware of my worth, and more determined to protect myself and those I love. I've found a peace within myself that I never thought possible, and I'm learning to embrace it every day. But I'll never forget the girl who ran from the darkness, the girl who fought to survive against all odds. That girl is me. And I'm still standing.